Imagine a world shattered by a war so vast that it engulfed nearly every corner of the globe, leaving tens of millions dead, nations devastated, and borders redrawn. This was the reality of World War II, a conflict whose far-reaching effects still shape global politics, economies, and societies today. The war didn't just alter the map of Europe or Asia, it forever changed the course of history. It pitted nations against each other, fueled ideological battles, and gave rise to new technologies and warfare strategies that would shape the world for decades. The scars of World War II run deep, and understanding how it all started is essential to grasping its profound impact on the 20th century. In this video, we'll delve into the intricate causes and background of World War II, unraveling the events and decisions that led to one of the deadliest and most destructive conflicts in human history. Welcome to the War Vault. In this episode, we're going to break down the key factors that triggered World War II, examining the political, economic, and ideological shifts that created the conditions for a global war. Let's explore the origins of the conflict that would reshape the world as we know it. 1. Background and causes of World War II, 1939 to 1945. The seeds of World War II were planted long before 1939, in the aftermath of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, officially ended the First World War but also laid the groundwork for the Second. The treaty's punitive terms, particularly towards Germany, created a political and economic climate ripe for instability. Germany was forced to take full responsibility for the war, pay massive reparations, and cede large portions of its territory. This humiliation fostered deep resentment within the German population, creating fertile ground for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, who promised to restore Germany's pride and revitalize the nation. In the years following World War I, the world was gripped by the Great Depression, which began in 1929 and spread globally. The economic collapse destabilized many governments, leading to widespread poverty and unemployment. In Germany, the economic crisis compounded the national humiliation of Versailles, and people were desperate for solutions. Hitler's Nazi Party capitalized on this frustration, promising a strong militarized state and the reversal of the injustices imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. His message of nationalism, anti-Semitism, and expansionism resonated with many Germans who felt betrayed by their government and the international community. The economic situation was not limited to Germany. The Great Depression affected many countries, pushing them toward authoritarian and militaristic solutions. In Italy, Benito Mussolini's fascist regime sought to create a new Roman Empire, while Japan turned to militarism as a way to address its economic and territorial ambitions in East Asia. These three nations, Germany, Italy, and Japan, would form the core of the Axis powers, determined to challenge the international order and expand their empires. As fascism gained momentum in Europe and Asia, the democratic nations of the West, primarily the United Kingdom, France, and the United States, were divided in their response. The economic turmoil of the 1930s made many wary of further military conflict, leading to a policy of appeasement. This policy, especially practiced by British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, involved making concessions to aggressive powers in the hope of avoiding war. The most infamous example of appeasement was the Munich Agreement of 1938, in which Britain and France allowed Hitler to annex Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland in exchange for a promise of peace. This decision, widely seen as a failure of diplomacy, only emboldened Hitler and pushed Europe closer to war. At the same time, Japan was expanding its influence in the Pacific. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, a resource-rich region in northeastern China, which it sought to control in order to fuel its growing military-industrial complex. This expansion was motivated by Japan's need for natural resources, as well as a desire to assert its dominance in the region. The League of Nations condemned the invasion, but it was largely powerless to stop Japan, which withdrew from the organization in 1937. Japan escalated its conflict with China by launching a full-scale invasion, further destabilizing East Asia. The failure of the League of Nations. A key factor contributing to the outbreak of World War II was the failure of the League of Nations, which was created after World War I in an attempt to prevent future conflicts. The League's primary goal was to provide a platform for international diplomacy and collective security, but its effectiveness was undermined by the absence of major powers, most notably the United States. Although President Woodrow Wilson championed the idea of the League in the 14 points, the U.S. Senate refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, keeping the United States out of the League and leaving it weak and without the authority necessary to enforce its decisions. As countries like Germany, Japan, and Italy began their aggressive expansion, the League proved unable to stop them. Its lack of military power and the reluctance of its members to take decisive action contributed to the rise of authoritarian regimes and the escalation of tensions. When Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, the League condemned the act but took no meaningful action. Similarly, when Hitler violated the Treaty of Versailles by remilitarizing the Rhineland in 1936, there was little more than diplomatic condemnation from France and Britain, with no military response. The League's inability to act decisively during these early aggressions set the stage for the outbreak of full-scale war just a few years later. The Nazi rise to power and expansionist policies. Adolf Hitler's rise to power in Germany was a direct consequence of the nation's post-WWI conditions. He promised to reverse the humiliating terms of the Treaty of Versailles, restore Germany's economic power, and expand its borders to create what he termed a Third Reich, a new German empire. Hitler's aggressive foreign policy aimed at annexing Austria, the Anschluss of 1938, the Sudetenland, part of Czechoslovakia, and eventually the whole of Czechoslovakia. His ultimate goal was the conquest of Eastern Europe, which he viewed as necessary to provide Lebensraum, living space for the growing German population. The Nazi regime was driven by an ideology of racial superiority, with an emphasis on Aryan supremacy and the systematic persecution of Jews, Romani people, disabled individuals, and other minorities. Hitler's expansionist policies were justified by this racial ideology, as he sought to enslave or exterminate those he considered inferior. The most infamous manifestation of Nazi ideology was the Holocaust, the state-sponsored genocide that led to the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, along with millions of others, in concentration camps across Europe. Hitler's foreign policy was built around the idea of living space for the German people and the expansion of German territory. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union in 1939 was a shocking alliance, as both regimes were ideologically opposed to one another. The pact divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, with Germany taking control of much of Poland, while the Soviet Union was given control over the eastern part. This allowed Hitler to invade Poland without fear of Soviet intervention, while also securing resources from the Soviet Union. The immediate trigger: the invasion of Poland. The immediate trigger for World War II was the invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany on September 1. Hitler had made clear his ambitions to reclaim territories lost after World War I, and Poland was a prime target. The invasion was preceded by a false flag operation by the Nazis, which involved the staged attack on a German radio station, designed to make it appear as though Poland had provoked Germany. With the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in place, Hitler had the green light to invade without worrying about Soviet interference. In response to the invasion of Poland, Britain and France, having signed mutual defense pacts with Poland, declared war on Germany on September 3. This marked the official start of World War II. Within weeks, the Soviet Union also invaded Poland from the east, in accordance with their secret agreement with Germany. The fall of Poland was swift, and by the end of September, the country had been partitioned between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, marking the beginning of a war that would soon spread across Europe and the rest of the world. The road to war. The early years of World War II saw a rapid escalation of violence and territorial expansion by the Axis powers. The German Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, was designed to achieve rapid victories through speed and overwhelming force. Germany quickly conquered much of Western Europe, including Denmark, Norway, France, the Low Countries, and parts of Poland. Meanwhile, Japan continued its expansion in East Asia, occupying China and the Philippines while launching attacks on U.S. territories in the Pacific. The war was now global, with the Allies, primarily the United Kingdom, France, the Soviet Union, and the United States, fighting to stop the spread of fascism and militarism. By 1941, the conflict had taken on truly global dimensions, setting the stage for a war that would eventually involve more than 100 million people from over 30 countries. World War II was no longer just a conflict for territorial expansion. It became a fight for survival, driven by ideological battles that would determine the future of humanity. It was a war that would shape the world order, destroy entire civilizations, and test the limits of human endurance. World War II, as one of the most complex and multifaceted conflicts in history, cannot be understood solely through its causes. It was fought not only across vast territories, but also in ideological, military, and political arenas that define the future of the modern world. By 1939, the war had begun, and the stage was set for a global confrontation between the Allied powers and the Axis powers. This second part delves into the major players, factions, and turning points that shaped the course of the war. The key players and factions of World War II. The Allies, though diverse in geography, politics, and ideology, united under one common goal: the defeat of fascism, militarism, and the authoritarian regimes of Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. The war's scale meant that the fate of every major power was intertwined. At its core were several countries whose leaders would leave indelible marks on history. The Axis powers, led by Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany, Benito Mussolini's Italy, and Imperial Japan, represented the aggressive expansionism that sought to reshape the global order. Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler. At the heart of the Axis was Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler. Hitler's vision for Europe was driven by a desire to establish German dominance, eliminate the influence of Jews and other minorities, and create a racially homogeneous empire. His early military successes were a direct result of his aggressive foreign policies, including the annexation of Austria, the Anschluss, and the invasion of Czechoslovakia. His infamous Blitzkrieg tactics, or Lightning War, combined rapid troop movements, air superiority, and coordinated attacks to achieve quick victories over much of Europe. By the time World War II broke out, Germany had already conquered Poland, and soon after, most of Western Europe. Hitler's ambition was clear: a 1,000-year Reich built on the destruction of his perceived enemies and the expansion of German territory. His ultimate goal was the conquest of Eastern Europe, a concept that would later translate into the Eastern Front, one of the war's bloodiest theaters. Hitler's invasions were propelled by a deep belief in the superiority of the Aryan race and a desire to wipe out entire populations that he considered subhuman, including Jews, Romani people, disabled individuals, and others. This racial ideology would lead to the Holocaust, the systematic genocide that killed 6 million Jews and millions of others in Nazi-occupied territories. Fascist Italy under Benito Mussolini. Fascist Italy, led by Benito Mussolini, was a key member of the Axis, though Italy's role in the war was often overshadowed by Germany's dominance. Mussolini, inspired by the rise of Hitler, sought to create a new Roman Empire, focusing on expansion in the Mediterranean and North Africa. Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935, hoping to re-establish a colonial empire. While Mussolini's forces initially made gains in the Mediterranean, Italy's military performance during the war was inconsistent. The Italian army was often unprepared, and their campaigns in North Africa, including a disastrous defeat at El Alamein in 1942, significantly weakened their position. Mussolini's alliance with Nazi Germany was solidified after the signing of the Pact of Steel in 1939, although Italy's participation in the war did not match the success of Germany's campaigns. Mussolini's regime crumbled as the Allies advanced through Italy in 1943, with Mussolini being overthrown and eventually executed in 1945 by Italian partisans. Despite his fall, the legacy of Mussolini's fascism had already had a significant impact on the war, especially in Italy's initial aggression and its complicity in the persecution of Jews and other minorities. Imperial Japan. On the other side of the globe, Imperial Japan was driven by its own vision of territorial expansion, aiming to dominate East Asia and the Pacific. Japan's military was focused on the conquest of neighboring territories to secure vital resources, particularly oil, rubber, and coal. Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931 was just the beginning of its imperial ambitions, which expanded throughout the 1930s. The invasion of China in 1937 and the subsequent atrocities committed by Japanese forces, such as the Nanjing Massacre, revealed Japan's brutal methods in its pursuit of dominance. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, marked Japan's formal entry into the global conflict. This surprise attack led the United States to declare war on Japan, pulling the U.S. into the conflict in the Pacific. The war with Japan would involve fierce battles across the Pacific Islands, culminating in the eventual defeat of Japan after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Japan's militarism, its desire for an Asia for Asians, and its disregard for human rights would leave deep scars in the Pacific region. The Allied powers, a unified front against fascism. The Allied powers were a diverse group of nations, each with its own political systems and ideologies, but united by their commitment to defeating the Axis powers. The primary Allied nations were the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and China, but many other countries joined their cause throughout the conflict. The United Kingdom and Winston Churchill. The United Kingdom, led by Winston Churchill after 1940, stood as one of the primary bulwarks against Nazi expansion. Churchill's resolve during the Battle of Britain in 1940, when the German Luftwaffe attempted to break British morale through relentless bombing campaigns, was crucial in preventing a German invasion of the UK. His leadership, with his famous speeches inspiring the British public to fight on, was pivotal in maintaining Allied resistance. The Soviet Union and Joseph Stalin,
The Soviet Union, initially bound to Nazi Germany by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression agreement signed in 1940, was eventually drawn into the war after Hitler broke the pact by launching Operation Barbarossa in 1941. The Soviet Union's resistance on the Eastern Front became one of the key turning points in the war. The Battle of Stalingrad, 1942–43, marked a significant victory for the Soviets, marking the first major defeat of the Nazis. From then on, the Soviet Red Army pushed westward, retaking Eastern Europe and eventually capturing Berlin in 1940. Under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union bore the brunt of the Nazi invasion. The war on the Eastern Front was the deadliest theater of the entire conflict, with millions of soldiers and civilians losing their lives. The Soviet Union's role in defeating Germany was critical, and it played a key part in the eventual downfall of the Third Reich. The United States, the arsenal of democracy. The United States initially adopted a policy of neutrality at the outset of the war, but the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan changed everything. The U.S. declared war on Japan on December 8, 1941, and soon after declared war on Germany and Italy. The U.S. rapidly mobilized its military and industrial capacity, providing crucial material support to the Allies. The U.S. transformed into the arsenal of democracy, supplying massive amounts of war material, from tanks and airplanes to ammunition and food, to its allies. The U.S. military's involvement in both the European and Pacific theaters was instrumental in the defeat of the Axis powers. The D-Day invasion in 1944, a massive Allied assault on Normandy, marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, as the Allies advanced from the west while the Soviets pushed from the east. In the Pacific, the U.S. engaged in a brutal island-hopping campaign, gradually moving closer to Japan's home islands, culminating in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 19.
The global scale of World War II. World War II was a truly global conflict, with battles fought on every continent, from the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of Southeast Asia, the frozen steppes of the Soviet Union to the vast Pacific Ocean. The war's scope and the number of nations involved make it unparalleled in human history. In North Africa, the conflict centered around control of the Suez Canal and access to oil in the Middle East. The Allied forces, including British and American troops, fought against German and Italian forces under the command of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. The Battle of El Alamein, 1942, marked a decisive turning point, where the Allies gained the upper hand and began pushing Axis forces out of North Africa. In the Pacific, the conflict took on a different character. The United States and Japan fought in a war that spanned thousands of miles, from the islands of the Pacific Ocean to China. Midway 1942, Guadalcanal 1942–1943 were some of the significant battles that turned the tide in favor of the Allies, with island-hopping strategies leading to the eventual defeat of Japan. The war's changing nature, technology, tactics, and the home front. World War II saw unprecedented technological advancements and innovations in warfare. The development of tanks, aircraft, radar, and the first nuclear weapons revolutionized the way wars were fought. The war also saw the increased use of propaganda, and psychological warfare became a key tool in mobilizing public opinion and undermining enemy morale. Civilians were increasingly targeted in strategic bombing campaigns, and entire cities were obliterated in the name of war strategy. The war was also deeply felt on the home front, with civilians playing a vital role in the war effort. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking on roles traditionally held by men who had gone to fight. Rationing, war bonds, and constant wartime mobilization were all part of daily life in the Allied nations. As World War II raged on, the stakes could not have been higher. The scale of the conflict expanded even further, with the fate of entire nations and the world order itself hanging in the balance. In this third part, we'll look at the decisive turning points of the war, the key battles, strategic decisions, and breakthroughs that ultimately shaped the final outcome. From the relentless struggles on the Eastern Front to the Allied invasion of Normandy and the final devastating blows in the Pacific, these events marked the beginning of the end for the Axis powers. Let's examine how the tides turned in favor of the Allies and the war eventually reached its conclusion. Turning points of World War II, key battles and strategic shifts. The Battle of Stalingrad, 1942–1943. By the time the Nazis launched their invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 under Operation Barbarossa, the Eastern Front had become the primary theater of war for both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. The early months of the invasion were marked by rapid advances as German forces captured vast swathes of Soviet territory. However, by the fall of 1942, the Nazis had come up against fierce Soviet resistance, and one battle would prove to be the turning point of the entire conflict. The Battle of Stalingrad is often considered the most significant battle of World War II, fought from August 1942 to February 1943. It was a brutal urban conflict that saw the Germans attempt to capture the city of Stalingrad, now Volgograd, in southern Russia. The city was a vital industrial hub and symbolic target for Hitler, who demanded its capture. However, the battle became a grueling war of attrition, with Soviet forces engaging in street-by-street combat. What began as a German offensive soon turned into a disastrous encirclement. As winter set in, Soviet forces, led by General Vasily Chuikov, launched a counteroffensive, trapping the German Sixth Army inside the city. Hitler's refusal to allow a retreat sealed the fate of his forces. The Germans were eventually forced to surrender in February 1943, marking the first major defeat of Nazi Germany. The battle not only decimated the German army, but also marked the beginning of the Soviet Union's counteroffensive, which would push the Nazis back across Eastern Europe. The Battle of Midway, 1942. In the Pacific, the conflict was characterized by fierce naval and air battles across vast distances. One of the most critical turning points was the Battle of Midway, fought in June 1942, just 6 months after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The battle occurred near the Midway Atoll, a strategically important American base in the Pacific Ocean. The Japanese, having enjoyed a string of victories, sought to neutralize the U.S. Pacific Fleet by attacking Midway, but the Americans had cracked Japan's naval code and were prepared for the assault. In one of the most decisive naval battles of the war, U.S. Navy aircraft, including bombers and torpedo planes, struck the Japanese fleet and sank 4 of its aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, a devastating loss from which Japan would never fully recover. The Battle of Midway was a turning point in the Pacific theater. It halted Japan's momentum and shifted the balance of power in the Pacific in favor of the Allies. From that point on, the U.S. would begin an offensive campaign of island hopping, gradually retaking territory from Japan and setting the stage for eventual victory. D-Day, the Allied invasion of Normandy. On the Western Front, the Allied invasion of Normandy, also known as D-Day, was the most significant operation of the war. It took place on June 6, 19. This operation, named Operation Overlord, was led by General Dwight D. Eisenhower and involved troops from the United States, the United Kingdom, and other Allied nations. The invasion began with the landing of 150. Despite heavy resistance from German forces, the Allies succeeded in establishing a foothold in Normandy, and by the end of June, they had liberated much of the region. The success of D-Day opened up a second front in Western Europe, forcing Germany to fight a two-front war for the first time since the invasion of the Soviet Union in 19. The Normandy invasion marked the beginning of the liberation of France and the eventual collapse of Nazi Germany. It was the first major step toward the Allied push into Germany, culminating in the fall of Berlin and the unconditional surrender of the Third Reich in May 9. The Soviet push to Berlin. As the Allies advanced from the west, the Soviets continued their relentless push eastward. The Battle of Berlin, which took place from April to May 1945, was the final major offensive on the Eastern Front. Soviet forces, under the command of Marshal Georgy Zhukov, surrounded the German capital, with intense urban warfare taking place within the city. The fall of Berlin came as a result of the Soviet Army's overwhelming numerical and material superiority. On May 10, 1945, the German garrison in Berlin surrendered. 2 days later, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker, and on May 7, 1945, Germany officially surrendered to the Allies, marking the end of the war in Europe. Berlin's fall symbolized the total defeat of Nazi Germany and the collapse of the Third Reich. It also marked the final victory of the Soviet Union in the war, with Stalin's forces having played a pivotal role in the defeat of Hitler. The aftermath of Berlin's capture led to the division of Germany into 4 occupation zones, with the US, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and France each taking control of a part of the country, a division that would persist through the Cold War. The Pacific finale, the Battle of Okinawa, and the atomic bomb. In the Pacific, the Allied advance towards Japan reached its climax in 1945 with the Battle of Okinawa, one of the bloodiest battles of the war. Fought between April and June 1945, the battle saw U.S. forces capture the strategically important island of Okinawa, located just 350 miles from Japan. The battle was marked by fierce resistance from the Japanese, including suicide attacks by kamikaze pilots, which caused heavy casualties on both sides. The Allied victory at Okinawa provided a staging ground for the planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. However, with Japan refusing to surrender, the United States faced the difficult choice of continuing the costly island-hopping campaign or finding a way to force Japan's capitulation. On August 6 and 9, 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These bombings led to Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, officially ending World War II. The atomic bombings, while controversial, were a pivotal moment in world history, marking the first and only use of nuclear weapons in warfare. The surrender of Japan came shortly after the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria in support of the Allies. Japan's defeat marked the end of the most destructive war in human history and set the stage for a new world order in the post-war era. The aftermath and legacy of World War II. World War II ended with the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, but its legacy would extend for decades. The war had reshaped the political and social landscapes of Europe, Asia, and beyond. In Europe, Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones, and the Soviet Union took control of much of Eastern Europe, setting the stage for the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the 2 superpowers, leading to a global ideological struggle between capitalism and communism that would dominate the next 45 years. The war also led to the creation of the United Nations in 1945, aimed at preventing future conflicts and promoting international cooperation. The atrocities committed during the war, particularly the Holocaust, led to the development of international human rights standards and war crimes tribunals, most notably the Nuremberg trials. For many nations, the war marked the beginning of decolonization, with former colonial powers weakened and independence movements gaining ground in Asia and Africa. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth look at World War II's decisive turning points. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth historical content.